The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, and I knew before I even answered it, the way you always know when the call you've been dreading has finally come. It was Riverside Hospice, and the night nurse, a kind woman named Carol, spoke in that practiced, careful tone that people use when they're delivering news they've delivered too many times before. "Miss Calloway, your father has been asking for you. I think you need to come now." I was already grabbing my keys before she finished the sentence, throwing on a hoodie over my pajamas, not even bothering with shoes that matched, driving through the dead silence of Raleigh, North Carolina at 3 in the morning with nothing but streetlights and the sound of my own heartbeat to keep me company. Because that's what you do when your father is dying. You move without thinking. You just go. Because some things in this life override every other instinct, and the chance to hold your father's hand one last time is absolutely one of them. Dad, Robert James Calloway, retired electrician, crossword puzzle champion, the man who read me bedtime stories until I was embarrassingly old and never once made me feel embarrassed about it, had been fighting pancreatic cancer for 19 months. And in that time, I had driven that 40-minute stretch of highway from my apartment to his house so many times that I could do it in my sleep, which on several occasions I nearly had, because I was a third-grade teacher working full-time, grading papers in the hospice parking lot, eating vending machine sandwiches for dinner, and showing up every single day because the alternative, the idea of Dad lying there alone, wondering if anyone was coming, was simply something I refused to allow. My older brother Dylan had different priorities. Dylan Calloway, 39 years old, co-owner of a mid-size commercial construction company called Calloway Brooks Development, the kind of man who wore Italian shoes to casual dinners and talked about leveraging assets at Thanksgiving. Dylan had visited Dad exactly 3 times in the last 2 months, always breezing in with expensive flowers and a cloud of cologne, staying 45 minutes, then vanishing back into his important, profitable, extremely busy life, always with a reason, always with an excuse, always with a promise to come back soon that somehow never materialized into an actual visit. So when I pulled into Dad's driveway at 3:15 in the morning and saw Dylan's black Escalade parked crookedly against the curb, I didn't feel relief. I felt the cold, specific unease of something being very wrong. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual, and I heard voices coming not from Dad's bedroom, where he should have been, but from his home office at the end of the hall, the room with the mahogany desk he'd bought himself after 25 years of working overtime, the room where he kept his personal files and the framed photo of Mom that he'd never taken down even after the divorce, the room that had no business being occupied at 3 in the morning. I pushed open the door, and what I saw stopped me cold. Dad was there, yes, but not in bed. He was in his wheelchair, positioned awkwardly near the desk, his eyes barely open, his head drooping forward slightly, while Dylan stood beside him holding a thick stack of documents, and a woman I had never seen before, 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, a canvas tote bag with a notary seal embroidered on the side, sat at Dad's desk with a stamp and an ink pad, watching me with the expression of someone who has just realized they are in the middle of something they cannot walk back from. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, the way voices go quiet when the brain is still catching up to what the eyes are seeing. Dylan didn't even have the grace to look caught. He looked mildly inconvenienced, the way he looked when someone cut him off in traffic, like I was the problem here, like my arrival was the disruption. "Dad wanted to finalize some estate matters," he said smoothly. "He had a clear moment earlier tonight and asked me to arrange it." Clear moment. I looked at my father, a man I had sat beside for 19 months, a man whose every expression I knew better than my own reflection, and what I saw was not clarity. What I saw was someone 3/4 submerged, someone barely present, someone whose eyes couldn't fully focus and whose hands lay open in his lap like he'd forgotten they belonged to him. "Dad," I said, crossing the room and kneeling beside his wheelchair, taking his hand, and he turned toward my voice with enormous effort, like a man turning into a wind. "Hannah," he said, and even in those 2 syllables I could hear how far away he was, how deep underwater, how much work it took him just to surface that much. Dylan was already repositioning the documents, sliding them onto the arm of the wheelchair, uncapping a pen. Just 2 more signatures, Dad. We talked about this, remember? The house and the investment accounts, just so everything is properly organized. I stood up and put my hand flat on the papers. He's on morphine, Dylan. He doesn't know what he's signing. He was completely lucid an hour ago, Dylan said, not even looking at me. Right, Miss Hensley? The notary, Miss Hensley, cleared her throat. He was responsive when I arrived, which was not the same thing as what Dylan had claimed, and everyone in the room understood the difference. I grabbed the documents before Dylan could stop me and started reading, and within 30 seconds, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something colder and more clarifying than fear. The way your hands shake when you understand exactly what is happening and exactly how deliberate it is. It was a new will, dated that day, March 14th, leaving the family home, the investment portfolio, the savings accounts, Dad's 1967 Ford Mustang that he'd spent 12 years restoring in the garage, and Mom's jewelry collection to Dylan in its entirety, with full management rights and no oversight conditions. And for me, there was a single paragraph, clearly not written by my father, because my father had never once spoken to me this way, that read, "To my daughter Hannah, who has always found her fulfillment in her work and her students, I leave my deepest affection, knowing that material wealth has never been her primary concern." I looked at Dylan. This isn't his writing. People use formal language in legal documents. He called me kiddo for 35 years, Dylan. He didn't write this. Dylan's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed smooth. He'd clearly rehearsed for this, prepared his answers, built himself a little fortress of plausible deniability. "One more signature, Dad, the power of attorney transfer, just here at the bottom." "Nurse!" I shouted, not because I decided to, it just came out of me, loud and sharp and absolute. "Carol! I need Carol in here right now." Carol came quickly, the way hospice nurses move when they hear urgency, and she took a look at my father, and her face changed the way faces change when medical training overrides every other response. She checked his eyes, his breathing, his pulse, and then looked at his medication chart on the clipboard hanging from the wheelchair, and something shifted in her expression, a tightening around the eyes. "He was given a dose 90 minutes ago," she said carefully. "He shouldn't need another for at least 3 hours." She looked at the small table beside where Dylan was standing, and I followed her gaze, and there was a glass of water with a slight residue at the bottom that hadn't been there this morning when I had left, and Dylan's hand moved, just slightly, just reflexively, toward the right pocket of his jacket, and I saw the corner of a prescription bottle cap. What happened next moved very quickly and very slowly at the same time, the way important moments always do. Carol calling the on-call physician, the physician arriving and assessing Dad, the careful clinical language about elevated morphine levels inconsistent with the prescribed schedule, the physician's eyes moving between the medication log and Dylan with an expression that required no interpretation, Dad being stabilized and moved back to his bedroom, Dylan gathering his documents with precise, controlled movements and saying he would let the professionals handle this, the notary, Miss Hensley, slipping out behind him with her tote bag pressed to her chest and her eyes fixed on the floor, and me sitting beside my father's bed, holding his hand while his breathing slowly steadied, watching the clock, not sleeping, not leaving, because that was the one thing I had been consistent about for 19 months, and I was not about to stop now. Not tonight. Not ever. Dad didn't recover from that night. The extra morphine had taken something from him that didn't come back. But he lived 6 more days, and I was there for all of them. And on the morning of March 20th, he passed away quietly, his hand in mine, Carol sitting in the corner of the room doing paperwork in the low light. And it was, in all the ways that mattered, a peaceful ending to a life well lived by a man who deserved better than what his son had tried to do to him. Dylan did not return to the hospice. Dylan was busy filing his new will with the county probate court, busy calling the investment firm, busy apparently moving very quickly to secure assets he believed were now legally his, with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. The funeral was a performance I will never forget. Dylan, in a charcoal suit, greeting relatives with a firm handshake and a measured expression of dignified grief, delivering a eulogy about Dad's work ethic and his business instincts and his hopes for the family's future, never once mentioning the crossword puzzles or the bedtime stories or the way Dad used to call me every Sunday morning just to talk about nothing, because Dylan was not eulogizing the father he knew. He was building a narrative, constructing a version of Robert James Calloway that justified everything Dylan did and everything he intended to do next. He avoided my eyes the entire day. 13 days later, we sat across from each other in the conference room of Patterson and Hale, the firm where Dad's attorney, Walter Hale, a 63-year-old man with silver hair and the calm unreadability of someone who has spent 40 decades watching families tear themselves apart over money, had practiced law for 30 years. Dylan had brought his own attorney, a specialist named Marcus Webb, who had the particular energy of someone paid to be aggressive, a man whose entire physical presentation communicated that he expected to win and found it mildly tedious when other people didn't immediately recognize this. Dylan sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, his expression relaxed, already spending his inheritance in his mind. Before we addressed the primary